I scoured the internet for some of the world's worst career advice, and in this video, I'm going to react to it. Hey everybody, it's Brian from A Life After Layoff, and today I want to share with you my reaction to some of the internet's worst career advice. As a career coach and a content creator, I come across some pretty hot takes as far as how people should be approaching their career, and I've gone ahead and compiled a list of some of the worst of them in my opinion. So I want to give you my perspective on why I think these are so bad. But I'm curious, what's the worst career advice that you've ever received? Leave a comment, let me know, and who knows, maybe I'll make a video about it in the future. So the first and worst piece of career advice, honestly probably the most common one that popped up, is this concept of if you work hard, you will be rewarded. Now, if you saw my last video that I made, I talk about this exact thing and why people typically get stuck in their career. And I guess a little bit of a spoiler alert, it's because people don't know who you are. And the reason why this one's a hot take is if you've been in the workplace for longer than like 5 minutes, you probably have come to realize that putting in all these extra hours and all this elbow grease, so to speak, is a very outdated concept. The idea of being the hardest worker in your department, producing the most output, working the most hours, simply does not get recognized the way that people think it is. Now, it may have worked in the past, but in today's job market, it just doesn't work. And unfortunately, to get ahead in today's workplace, it's who you know, and probably more importantly, who likes you. And if you want more detail, check out the video that I just made about that subject. The next piece of bad advice that I've been coming across is this idea of going to HR if you have an issue with your boss or you have an issue with a colleague. The reason being, and I've made a video about this as well, is that HR is not your friend. People have this misconception that going to HR is a listening and sympathetic ear. It's almost like a therapist that you can go and vent to, and you can kind of spill your frustrations onto them. If you do this, pay close attention because the HR department is taking very careful notes. What they're listening for is liability, because anything you say can and will be used against you at a future point in time. And as you go into the HR department and you start making these complaints, one of two things will happen. You either have a legitimate complaint and they go and they investigate it and they handle it the way that they need to, or you start to give yourself a reputation of being a problem. And if you come in and you constantly are complaining about this person and that person and your boss and all this stuff, you start to get a target on your back. And in a time of economic uncertainty, this is certainly not the reputation that I want to have. Simply put, HR is not your friend. They are there to protect the company's assets and interests. And if they deem that you are a risk to that, you can be certain that you'll need to update your resume in the not too distant future. So if you do have a problem with a colleague or a boss, I would suggest you try a more constructive way of handling it on your own because you really don't want a third party getting involved unless it's absolutely necessary. The next piece of bad advice that I've seen is do what you love and you'll never work a day in your life. Now, on some level, I probably would agree with this, that you should love what you do. And in some cases, I've advocated finding something that you love and figuring out a way to monetize it. Now, this one's a double-edged sword because you could burn yourself out doing something that you used to love to do and being forced to do it to keep the lights on. However, on the flip side, you're much more likely to be motivated doing something that you really enjoy doing and making a decent income from it. The issue is finding the right balance, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you should do something that you love, but rather something that you're good at. I'll use myself as an example. People assume with my background that I'm a very passionate recruiter and HR person. The truth is I have a lot of experience doing it. It's something I know really well, and I enjoy the idea of sharing knowledge and helping people. But the actual recruiting and certainly the HR component is not something that I'm overly passionate about. And I've told that to people before and they've been very shocked about it. But the simple truth is finding something that you're good at may produce better results for you than something that you absolutely love. The next piece of bad advice, and this is unfortunately one that a lot of people have found out the hard way recently, is that companies value loyalty. Simply put, companies are not loyal to employees. They pay you to do a certain job and produce a certain output. And when they no longer value that output or no longer need it, they no longer need your services and they cut you loose. And it's very cold, it's very calculating, it's very businesslike. The idea of loyalty is essentially a human emotion, and you're dealing with a cold, I hate to say this, but a heartless entity, a business entity who answers to shareholders. So the unfortunate reality here is that you are a number on a spreadsheet, and as long as you're producing enough widgets or adding enough value, then there will be a place for you. And when you're no longer able to produce that, or your job is no longer needed, these companies do not have the same loyalty back. And that tends to be why layoffs can often be so painful, is because it feels like a betrayal. But to the company, they've moved on and they're not looking back, and they're probably not missing you. And that's a brutal reality. And the next piece of bad advice is you should spend 8 hours a day applying for jobs after you get laid off. The simple reality is there's only so many jobs out there. And by you hyper focusing on applying for jobs 8 hours a day, every single day of the week, A, you're going to run out of jobs to apply to. There's just going to simply be not that many positions. And B, you're going to burn yourself out really fast. Now, I know that there's this desire to get back to work as quickly as you can, but trying to brute force your way into a new role is not going to be healthy for you long term. You should be carving out a certain number of defined hours, like say 2 to 3 each day, dedicated to searching for jobs and applying for new positions. Another couple of hours where you are dedicated to improving yourself, and then the rest of the time working on your networks and other passion projects. You still have to have a balance. You should treat your day like an 8-hour day, but it should be broken into chunks. You will go nuts if you treat your job search like a full-time job where you're spending 8 hours every single day, Monday through Friday, looking and applying for jobs, picking up rock after rock after rock, looking under the same ones over and over again, and just finding the same table scraps. And if you follow my channel at all, you know how I feel about panic applying and brute force. It just rarely works, and it's not worth all the rejection letters that you're bound to get. Next up is something that's becoming more and more popular, especially among the Gen Z generation. It's that job hopping is bad for your career. Now, I do have an opinion on job hopping, and I do think that if it's done incorrectly, it can actually hurt your career. If you're somebody that jumps from job to job to job, same rate of pay, same title, same level, and you don't have a compelling reason or a strategic reason why you're doing so, then it can come back and really start to bite you, especially after you get to the third, maybe fourth job in a short period of time. However, strategic job hopping can be a really effective way to move up rapidly in your career, especially from a compensation level, and this is particularly important or powerful early in your career. So the advice is double-edged here. Yes, it can hurt you, but if done correctly, it can be a very powerful and very effective strategy. The next piece of bad advice that I found is kind of related to job hopping, and it's that if you find yourself in a bad job, you should at least try to stick it out for a certain period of time, whether it's a year. I've heard some people suggest 3 years. And here's the deal. If you're in a truly toxic situation, or you realize quickly that you made a mistake, there's no point in sticking out a bad employer. Even if it's a really short term, you get there, you've only been working there for a couple of months, and you realize like, man, there's a real problem here. There's no compelling reason to stick with a bad employer or a toxic boss. Pull the ripcord, get out, and find the right fit for you. Because if you're gonna dedicate a certain amount of time to an employer, kind of sticking it out, make it with a company that's worth your time. Now, of course, this is a blanket statement. There are things like job gaps and other reasons why you may want to stick out a less than ideal circumstance. But in general, you shouldn't be tolerating toxic environments for the sake of some sort of loyalty. This last piece of bad advice might be slightly controversial to some people, but it's that you should go get a master's degree, or even take this a step further, a certification or something, to earn more money. And the reason why that's a fallacy is that employers, unless they're absolutely demanding that in the job description, do not value that degree the same way that you might, especially if you're not looking to move into a senior leadership level, or the job type that you're interested in demands that degree. So I'm thinking higher education, some scientific or research roles that might require a PhD. But in general, if you're interested in making more money and you think that by going and getting a master's degree and staying at an individual contributor or even potentially mid-manager level, the reality is that employers do not value it in general the same way that you might. So my advice instead would be to spend your time acquiring the right kind of skills that employers are actually demanding, so that you yourself can demand a higher salary. So there you go. That's my reaction to some bad career advice that I'm seeing going around the internet. And again, let us know what the worst advice is that you've ever received in your career. And before we end the video, if you're interested in learning how to reclaim control in your career, you can avoid some of this bad advice, make sure you sign up for my free weekly newsletter. I share deep insider tips on resumes, interviewing, LinkedIn and how to network yourself and how to skip by the recruiter altogether. You don't want to miss it if you're actively looking for a job or you want to reclaim control in your career. And keep in mind, it's absolutely free. So hope to see you there. Anyway, appreciate you watching. We'll see you on the next one.